They fined me $200 for legally feeding my family and kept hiking across my land like it was theirs. Have you ever been punished by someone with less land, less sense, and far less power, but thought the rules gave them control? Because that's what this was. It started with a letter. Cream-colored envelope. HOA seal embossed in gold like a knockoff crown. He opened it slowly, not expecting much. Probably another bulletin about water pressure or bin alignment. Instead, it was a citation. Unauthorized hunting activity observed on Ridge Trail per community reports. Fine issued, $200. Your actions compromise the community's values and safety. He read it twice, then a third time. They were fining him for hunting on his own land. Never mind that the Ridge Trail wasn't theirs. Never mind that it sat a full half-mile outside the HOA boundary. Never mind that he had a state-issued license and the land was zoned for rural recreational use. None of that seemed to matter. What mattered to them was image, a deer hanging in the smokehouse, dogs trained to track without barking, a man field dressing, a buck at dawn. To them, it wasn't sustenance. It was barbaric, uncivilized, something that didn't align with the spirit of the neighborhood, but he wasn't part of their neighborhood. He never had been. They'd crept closer over the years. What used to be 20 miles of pine and quiet was now beige stucco and speed bumps. The HOA wasn't here when he moved in. Hell, it hadn't even existed when his father lived here, and his grandfather before that. The ridge he stood on, rifle slung silent across his shoulder, had watched over 3 generations. Family dogs buried under tall pines, a hand-carved bench facing west where he once proposed to his late wife, and now they were sending fines like he was a tenant. Aesthetic. Violations. Endangerment to hikers, as if he was the trespasser. That's what stung most, not the money, not even the arrogance, but the erasure. They fined me for doing what my grandfather taught me, he muttered, stepping outside, eyes drifting toward the ridge. They fined me for honoring the land they jog across with trail mix and Bluetooth speakers. He didn't fight back. Not yet. He didn't scream, post online, or march into their meetings with a flag and a file folder. Instead, he stood on his porch that night, listening to the wind through the oaks. He watched as the shadows of late-evening hikers passed across the ridge again. Off-leash dogs bounding into nesting areas, runners talking loud about dinner plans. They were so used to that trail, so certain it belonged to them, that they never once asked who actually held the deed beneath their Nikes. And that was their first mistake. Because while they saw boundaries as suggestions, he saw them as sacred. He tucked the letter into a drawer, walked back inside, and quietly turned on the old desktop his wife used to manage their land files. He opened county records, zoomed in on parcel maps, checked easements, cross-referenced, tax filings, and what he saw next. That was the second mistake they'd made. But the first was ever thinking the man who listened to the land wouldn't hear when it cried foul. They fined me $200 to remind me who's in charge. What they didn't realize was how badly they'd just misjudged the terrain. It started with a map. The kind most people overlook. Black lines, parcel numbers, zoning layers stacked like topographic secrets. But for him, it was a battleground. The fine had landed like an insult carved into stone. He hadn't gotten angry. He'd simply gone quiet. He rolled out the surveyor's map on his workbench late one night, tracing the trail that wound just beyond his tree line, the same one HOA members jogged every weekend. He followed it visually, parcel by parcel, and then he saw it. The trail cut across land that didn't belong to the HOA, not even close. It was part of an old, forgotten tract originally held by a now-defunct logging company. Curious, he pulled county tax filings and land title records from the clerk's website. The property, a long wooded strip that hosted the main trail and connected two HOA neighborhoods, hadn't paid taxes in years. It was about to go up for tax default. Auction. It took everything in him to keep his face still. Because this wasn't just leverage, it was land. Land he could walk, land he could own, land they assumed was theirs, but had never legally secured. All it would take was a quiet bid and the right paperwork. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the digital plat map glowing on the screen. They fined him $200, and now they were about to learn what $200 could really buy. He remembered the forest the way it used to be, thick with timber, trucks crawling along old gravel paths, the whine of saws in the distance. Back then, the land was private. But as the logging company faded and developers closed in, that stretch of woodland had become a no-man's land. The HOA grew quickly. Neat houses, overzealous committees, trimmed hedges and trail signs that looked official, but weren't. Nobody asked permission. Nobody filed an easement. They just started using it. It's always been part of the community, the president had said once, waving a hand toward the trees. But always is a dangerous word. What the HOA called tradition was really just assumption. They'd built their community around convenience, not legality, and never expected the original owners to return. They'd paved a fantasy trail on borrowed land. And now that trail had come due. On paper, the HOA preached environmental responsibility, green events, native plantings, zero-waste weekends. But boots on the ground told a different story. He'd placed trail cams 2 years earlier after finding cigarette butts and torn granola wrappers near a deer nesting zone. He hadn't planned revenge then. He just wanted to document the hypocrisy. Now those cameras became evidence. Footage showed off-leash dogs chasing turkeys. HOA members throwing weekend beer parties. Someone dumped lawn clippings and even an old mattress off a side path. They'd fined him for hunting legally on his land while letting children scream through protected habitats and letting trash collect under cedar branches. He flipped through the time lapses, a jogger carving initials into a birch trunk, a pack of hikers shouting with Bluetooth speakers blasting top 40 hits, a drone buzzing low above a resting hawk. All this on private land. They wanted order, he muttered to himself, but only when it benefited them. He didn't want revenge. He wanted peace. The HOA didn't see the land the way he did. To them, it was a backdrop, something to walk through, decorate, control. To him, it was memory, connection, the smell of pine resin and old oak. The place where his grandfather taught him to track deer and his wife used to lay wildflowers on the porch table. They thought they could regulate that with a template violation form. They wanted to manage my land, he whispered, while ignoring the rules on theirs. He started waking earlier, walking the old boundaries again, watching how the light touched the ridges at dawn, not with anger, but with focus. Because now it wasn't just a fight about rules. It was a reminder of who he was and what they were not. No public announcements, no confrontation. He quietly filed an LLC under a generic name, discreet mailing address, clean paperwork. He contacted the county clerk about the upcoming auction. He reviewed conservation statutes, permits, and rural protection designations. Then, like a man planting seeds for a future garden, he submitted the application that would change everything. A wildlife conservation easement. It was a legal shield, one that not only barred future recreational development, but also restricted all non-conservation use. In other words, no hiking. It would grant him tax credits, state-level protection, and complete authority over who entered the land. And why? The land they'd claimed by habit was about to be protected by law. He clicked Submit on the final form and stood up slowly. Outside, a trail runner zipped by with earbuds in, oblivious. They thought a $200 fine could tame me, he said, almost to the wind. They never expected I'd buy the ground under their hiking boots. The auction came and went without fanfare. Just a half-page legal notice in a county bulletin, tucked between zoning changes and obituaries. No spotlight, no bidding war, no red flags. His LLC, filed under a conservation trust name, submitted the highest and only bid. Clean title, full ownership. The deed came in the mail 3 weeks later, along with the legal parcel number now registered under his name. The same strip of forest the HOA had paraded across for years was now his. And, not just his, protected. He wasted no time. Official signs went up the next day, made from weather-treated metal and staked deep into the loam. Private wildlife conservation area access, restricted by state order violators, subject to civil and criminal penalties permit netariers. WCA 782-12B as enforced under Section 901A Wildlife Code. Next came the fencing. Not a crude barrier, but a well-built, low-impact timber gate with signage on both sides. A discreet lock, motion-triggered cameras. He didn't just want them to stay out. He wanted them to understand why. He called in a favor from a local game warden he'd known since high school. They walked the boundary line together, reviewing conservation restrictions. The warden offered enforcement support during the first few weeks. Everything was legal. Everything was quiet. Until Saturday morning hit. They came like they always did. In packs, matching fleece, hydration packs, earbuds tucked in. Dogs off leash. Laughter echoing through the trees. Except this time, they stopped short. The gate stood firm across the opening of the trail. The signs were large, unmistakable. The lock didn't budge. For the first time in years, the forest pushed back. They rattled the gate, took photos. One woman even shouted across the trees, expecting someone to come remove it. Instead, the trail cam clicked softly from the ridge above. By mid-morning, calls were flooding into the HOA board inbox. Confused hikers, furious dog walkers, parents demanding answers. Who closed the trail? What conservation area? That land was part of our community. We've used that trail for years. What gives them the right? Panic spread like spilled gasoline. The HOA president's name trended on the neighborhood app. Rumors bounced between legal action and conspiracy. They didn't know who owned the LLC. They didn't know the man behind the deed. All they knew was that the gate had changed everything. The HOA president requested a meeting, not by email, not by letter, but in person, a surprise knock at the protagonist's door one Thursday afternoon. He opened it slowly, wiping his hands clean of cedar sawdust. The president, a man built more for meetings than mountains, tried to project calm authority. "Need to talk," he said. The protagonist gestured toward the path leading to the ridge. "We'll talk up there." They walked in silence. No Bluetooth speakers, no joggers, just wind, birds. The land, finally respected. They stopped at the newly posted gate. "You can't just close down a public trail," the president said. "It's been used for years. There's precedent." The protagonist looked at him, eyes calm but unblinking. "Public trails are earned. This land wasn't. You've been guests, and now the invitation's been revoked." He handed over a folder. Deed copies, state permit, conservation easement registration, even printed infractions pulled from trail cam footage. This is a protected habitat now. Any access outside of conservation work is a violation, the president tried to recover. "We can work something out, adjust signage. Maybe compromise on hours." No, the word landed like a gavel. "No more assumptions, no more noise. You manage your side, I'll manage mine." The next HOA board meeting was closed door, but the fallout wasn't. They'd hired a lawyer. A big one, from the city. Someone who wore cufflinks and billed by the minute, But 5 minutes into the conversation, their tone changed. The lawyer reviewed the records, confirmed the title transfer, pulled the conservation filing from the state register, checked the fines listed under the wildlife code. He closed the file slowly. "There's no case," he said. "No easement was ever recorded, no legal claim to access, and now it's protected land under state law. If you sue, you'll lose, and you'll owe legal fees." "How much?" someone asked. The lawyer looked around the room. "More than your annual budget." One by one, the board members sank back into their chairs. The trail was gone. No more HOA eco walks. No more youth adventure races. No more weekend fundraisers hosted on the trail's edge. The maps were redrawn. Event calendars were wiped, all for a fine they should never have sent. He stood at the gate one morning just after dawn, sipping hot coffee as fog curled through the trees. Hadn't seen a jogger in weeks. The birds had returned. The deer, too. He didn't gloat. He didn't post online. He didn't brag to neighbors. But he did leave the gate exactly where it stood, clean, silent, and locked. A reminder not of vengeance, but of boundary. "They tried to fine me for honoring the land," he said softly, watching the morning sun rise through the canopy. "Now they can't even walk across it." The gate clicked softly behind him as he stepped into the stillness. It was early, that hour before the world wakes, where mist hangs low and the woods breathe in their own rhythm. He knew this stretch of forest by memory now. Every bend of the stream, every fallen pine, every patch where deer bedded down beneath the old logging cuts. And this morning, they were back. A doe and her 2 fawns dipped their heads into the stream he'd helped clear months ago, nudging each other playfully, unaware of the man standing still 20 feet away. Overhead, a family of nuthatches bounced between branches, their songs bright and undisturbed. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt alive. No joggers, no shouting, no speakers strapped to camelbacks, no beer cans wedged under, roots or forgotten dog bags hanging like black flags from tree limbs, just space, just time, just the earth recovering. His dogs ran freely ahead, not barking, not chasing, just belonging. They knew this was their land now, too. A place not claimed with fences, but with care. Every stone reset, every path walked without ego. It wasn't revenge. That had never really been the goal. It was return, to silence, to sovereignty, to something the HOA had forgotten, respect for the living land. And in return, the forest had softened, reopened. Somewhere, deep inside him, something unclenched, not in triumph, but in peace. He found himself standing beside the old cedar stump again, the one they used to tie balloons to during their trail races. It still had traces of paint flaking off, years old, from some HOA-sponsored color run. That's where the notice had been posted, too. The one that tried to fine him $200 for unapproved wildlife attractants because he'd set out a salt lick for winter deer. He smiled at the memory now. Not in bitterness, but in marvel. "They tried to erase me with a fine," he whispered, and handed me the map to their own hypocrisy. Because once he'd followed the paper trail, the lies were exposed. They'd never filed easements. They'd trespassed with pride. They talked of conservation while letting their pets scatter nesting birds. They claimed stewardship, yet left coffee cups buried in roots. In trying to punish him, they'd revealed their own rot. They saw land as leverage, he said aloud, running his hand along the cedar's weathered bark. But I saw it as legacy, and that's what changed everything. Not the fence, not the signs, not even the deed, but the mindset. One side wanted to extract, the other wanted to preserve. That trail? It hadn't just been a shortcut through the trees. It had become a symbol of entitlement, of noise, of the lie at the center of their authority. And now, it was quiet. Not lost, not forgotten, just free. He returned to the edge of the ridge where the trailhead used to start, a place where, months ago, hikers would buzz past him without a glance, as if he were the intruder, as if land were a gym, not a living thing. He knelt by the new gate post where vines had started to curl around the wood. A sign hung there still, weathered but firm. Wildlife Conservation Zone. Entry by permit only, and beneath that, etched into the post with a wood-burning tool, almost like a secret. Listen long enough, and the land will speak back. He traced it with his finger, then stepped back. "That fine?" he whispered, almost amused. "It cost me $200. He looked out over the tree line, sun spilling gold across the tops. "What they lost," he said, voice trailing off, "was priceless. It wasn't just a trail. It was face-saving tradition, an illusion of control, and now their entire eco-branding effort, the events, the flyers, the local partnerships, had collapsed under the weight of their own negligence. He didn't post about it, didn't boast, but word had spread, quietly. Parents told their kids not to sneak onto the trail anymore. HOA members began whispering that the board had overstepped. Even the loudest enforcer had stopped jogging past his driveway. Funny how fast things shifted when the roots were shaken. Final line. He walked back down the ridge as the sky brightened into full morning, dew clinging to his boots, the scent of pine sweet and clean. Behind him, the forest exhaled, not with fear, not with resentment, but with relief. He paused one last time at the edge of the land, laying a hand against the cedar post, letting the wind move past him. "Funny thing about land," he said quietly, eyes on the rising sun. "It remembers who listened. Have you ever stood your ground quietly, not with anger, but with strategy? Maybe someone underestimated you. Maybe they tried to push you out. And instead of fighting loud, you fought smart. Drop your story in the comments, and subscribe for more true tales of quiet power and poetic justice.